Hello, Mrs. Michelle. Today I'm going to explain your illness.
What do I have?
You have Alzheimer's disease. It's the most common cause of dementia in older adults. Right now, more than 50 million people worldwide live with it, and because populations are living longer, that number is expected to triple by the year 2050.
Oh, so what do I have?
Alzheimer's, ma'am. Let me explain what that means. Alzheimer's has a multifactorial etiology, which means it doesn't have just one cause. Instead, it can appear because of a combination of factors: genetics, environmental influences, age, and even lifestyle habits. Some of the most important gene factors are mutations in the APP gene, the presenilin 1 and presenilin 2 genes, the MAPT gene that affects tau protein, and the presence of the APOE4 allele. These are technical names, but don't worry. I'll explain each in simple terms.
Good, because all of that sounds like an alien's language to me.
I know. Let's start with APP, which stands for amyloid precursor protein. Normally, APP sits in the membranes of neurons and helps them in their usual functions, but sometimes APP is cut incorrectly by enzymes. When this happens, it produces toxic fragments called beta amyloid. These fragments don't dissolve. Instead, they accumulate and form sticky clusters called amyloid plaques between neurons. These plaques interfere with communication between brain cells, almost like chewing gum stuck inside of an electrical outlet.
Oh, so the brain gets clogged with gum. When I was young, I used to hide gum under the school desk. Maybe it's revenge.
Something like that. The difference is that neurons can't scrape it off. Now, mutations in APP are rare, but when they do appear, they're inherited in an autosomal dominant way. That means if a parent carries the mutation, each child has a 50% chance of inheriting it. These gene mutations usually cause early onset Alzheimer's, meaning symptoms appear before the age of 65, sometimes even in the 40s or 50s.
That's very young. I thought it was only for old people like me.
Yes, late onset Alzheimer is far more common, but early onset exists, especially when genes like APP or presenilins are involved. Speaking of which, let's move on to the presenilin genes. Presenilin. Don't worry, it's hard to pronounce. There's two: presenilin 1 or PSEN1 and presenilin 2 or PSEN2. These genes produce proteins that are a part of enzyme Y secretase. This enzyme cuts APP into fragments, but when presenilin genes are mutated, Y secretase cuts APP incorrectly, producing too many long, sticky beta amyloid fragments. These fragments quickly clump together and accelerate amyloid plaque formation.
So basically, the scissors are broken and cut the paper on the wrong way.
Exactly. Broken scissors that make a mess. Presenilin 1 is the most common cause of inherited early onset Alzheimer's, and symptoms can appear as early as the 40s. Presenilin 2 mutations are less common but act in a similar way.
Sorry, what? Are you still talking about Caesar?
Yes, but let's move on. Another important gene is the MAPT gene, which codes for the tau protein. Tau lives inside neurons, especially along the axons, and its job is to stabilize microtubules, the internal skeleton and railway system of the cell. Thanks to tau, materials can travel up and down the neuron. But when tau becomes hyperphosphorylated, that means too many phosphate groups attached to it, it changes shape. Abnormal tau sticks to other tau molecules, forming twisted fibers called neurofibrillary tangles. These tangles collapse the internal transport system, so the neuron can't move nutrients or signals properly, and eventually the neuron dies.
So the brain's train tracks get all twisted up. No more trains.
That's a great metaphor. Without trains, nothing gets delivered. Now, the combination of amyloid plaques outside the neurons and tau tangles inside the neurons leads to widespread cell death. This results in brain atrophy. The brain literally shrinks. What's scary is that these changes can begin 10 years or more before symptoms appear.
So my brain was already planning this betrayal a decade ago?
Yes, it can be a slow and silent process. And then there's one of the most famous risk genes, the apolipoprotein E4 allele, or APOE4.
That one is hard to pronounce too.
Apolipoprotein E normally helps carry cholesterol and clear beta amyloid from the brain. But the 4 variant is less efficient at cleaning, so amyloid accumulates faster. Having 1 copy of 4 increases your risk of Alzheimer's by about 3 times. Having 2 copies increases it up to 12 times, and the disease usually starts earlier. Still, it's very important to remember, APOE4 does not directly cause Alzheimer's. Many people with this mutation never get Alzheimer's, and many with Alzheimer's don't have this mutation. But statistically, it's the strongest genetic risk factor for late onset Alzheimer's.
So, if I eat less cholesterol, I'm safe?
Not exactly. Diet alone can't change the gene, but lifestyle still matters, which brings us to other risk factors. The biggest risk factor is age. About 10% of people over the age of 65 have Alzheimer's, and about 25% of people over 85. Other risk factors include obesity, hypertension, diabetes, chronic inflammation, smoking, depression. Social isolation also increases risk.
So, basically, everything in life is bad.
Not everything. The good news is that there are also protective factors. Staying mentally active, reading, learning, doing puzzles, that helps. Physical exercise improves blood flow to the brain. A Mediterranean diet with fish, olive oil, nuts, vegetables, and fruits is very beneficial. And being socially active, talking, playing games, and dancing help delay cognitive decline.
So, bingo and dancing counts as medicine? I like this treatment.
Yes, bingo counts. Now, let's talk about what happens in the brain, called the pathophysiology. In summary, beta amyloid plaques build up outside of neurons, tau tangles build up inside of neurons, chronic inflammation and oxidative stress damage the brain further. This causes progressive brain atrophy, starting with the hippocampus, which explains why memory loss is usually the first symptom. Later, the cerebral cortex is affected, which causes problems with reasoning, language, and behavior.
So my brain is slowly shrinking like a raisin?
Yeah, a raisin's a good visual. That's why the symptoms appear gradually. Speaking of symptoms, the clinical manifestations of Alzheimer's are divided into stages. In early stages, patients forget appointments, names, or recent conversations. They may lose objects or struggle to organize tasks. In moderate stages, the problems grow. Language difficulties arise, disorientation to time and space, mood changes, suspiciousness, and even hallucinations or delusions. Some people get lost on familiar streets. In advanced stages, patients lose motor abilities, difficulty walking, balancing, or even sitting upright. Swallowing becomes hard, communication is lost, and complete dependence on caregivers is required.
So it's like slowly going back to being a baby again?
Yes, but equally surrounded by just as much love and care.
And how do you know I have Alzheimer? Maybe I'm just forgetful. Everyone forgets things.
That's true. That's why this diagnosis is careful. Doctors use several methods: cognitive tests like the mini mental state exam, brain imaging, such as an MRI and PET scans, to detect atrophy and amyloid deposits, and cerebrospinal fluid tests to measure beta amyloid and tau levels.
So they put a USB in my head and download my brain?
Not exactly, but sometimes it feels that way. Now, treatments. Unfortunately, there's no cure for Alzheimer's, but there are many ways to slow progression and improve the quality of life. Medications like donzepil, galantamine, rivastigmine can improve neuron communication by increasing acetylcholine. Memantine protects against excess glutamate, which can be toxic. New therapies like monoclonal antibodies target and remove amyloid plaques. Non-drug therapies like cognitive stimulation, exercise, and strong family and social supports.
So bingo is still in the prescription?
Yes, bingo, dancing, and spending time with loved ones are always a part of the prescription.
Okay, I understand. And what do I have?
Here we go again.